Harvey, what day is today?
Today is December 26, 2022, corresponding to Gimel Tevet 5783.
And it's the night after Hanukkah ended. So this year has to do with Hanukkah. I figured today was Hanukkah, so it's still considered, I think, in Yonah D'Yoma. Yeah, it still counts. But it was an interesting shayla. I was working on it the whole week. If you saw my email, I was talking to my dear friend. Now he's Yael, but he used to be Joey. I mean, I still call him Joey. So we were talking, and he told me he's going to one of his kids or something, and he's going to light candles there. I said, "Are you sleeping there?" He says, "No." I said, "Well, you can't light candles if you're sleeping there." He says, "Why not?" I said, "Because it says in Mishnah Berurah you can't light candles if you're coming home." And so we had a big argument. He had a diak in the Mishnah Berurah. I'll show it to you in a minute. And then he went and he spoke to Rabbi what's his name in Kew Garden Hills, Big Talmud Chacham. I'll remember his name in a minute. So he told him that there's a sefer, my Chanukah, Rabbi Olbaum. Yeah, he spoke to Rabbi Olbaum. Oh, Rabbi Olbaum says, "Oh, that's an old shayla," and you'll see it in a second what the shayla is. So Rabbi Olbaum told us a sefer, my Chanukah. It was written by the Satmar Dayan that talks about it. It took me a while to find it on all the different apps that I have, but I located it and I found some more material. So it's an interesting shayla. The shayla is like this. The Gemara says, "Amar Rav Sheshes, Achsanoi chayiv ner Chanukah." A guest is chayiv in ner Chanukah. Amar Rav Zera mireish ki avina be. In other words, if he's staying in somebody's house, he's chayiv in ner Chanukah. Mireish ki avina be rav mishtatafna bepriti. Initially, when I would be staying by as a guest at somebody's house, so I was mishtatif with a pruta. I gave him a small amount of money in order to be out to the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. Basar din nesivi itza. Once I got married, Amina, I thought hashtavade god tzrichna. Now I don't have to give money. The komadlik alai bego beisoy. Yeah, because my wife is lighting for me, and it's neri shuvei, so you could be outside with the hadlaka of your wife. So the Shulchan Aruch quotes this halacha. The Shulchan Aruch is there's a question if you're visiting. Where do you light? Do you light where you're sleeping, or do you light where you're eating? So the Shulchan Aruch says, I didn't underline it, but near the bottom in the Haggadah, 2 lines down. V'yesh omrim de bizman hazeh shemadlikim b'fnim mamish yadlik b'makom she'ochel v'chein ogel. The main place where you light is where you eat, because if you're lighting, in the olden days they used to light outside, so the Pesumanisa was more where you're sleeping. But nowadays it's where you eat. And that's why when people go away, let's say people go for an Eifruf, and they're staying over Shabbos, and they're eating in one house, and they're staying in somebody else's house. So they ask me, where should I light Hanukkah candles? I tell them, you should light it where you're eating, not where if it's possible. And the same thing with lighting Shabbos candles. So Mishnah Berurah says, b'makom she'ochel, the makom achilaso ikar. That's more predominant than where you sleep. V'dafka l'inyan achsanoi hanal she'ein beiso etzlo. When it says that an achsanoi could be yotzei, that an achsanoi, is he going on? Oh, she'ein beiso etzlo. Olin ben hasamach hashulchan aviv. Avol misha the soed etzel chaver bakroi the yeshul sham ba'is bel seir. Now this din of achsanoi, when Shulchan Aruch says you light where you're eating, that means because you're a guest, so you don't have your own house, you're achsanoi, so it's better to light where you're eating than where you're sleeping. So Mishnah Berurah says that's only if this house is not nearby. But he says, but somebody goes to somebody for a meal, the Yeshua Shambai is supposed to hear, and he has a house in the same city, he has to go home and light near Chanukah. And if he's lazy and he doesn't want to go home, he tells his wife to light for him. But it's better that he should do it himself. So the Mishnah Berurah, this is the basis for the whole discussion here. The Mishnah Berurah says that the din of achsanai that you could be, I'd say, with the hadlaka of the Baal Habayis is only if your house is not nearby. But if your house if you have a house but also here in the same city, you can't be yotzei with the lighting of the Baal Habayis. So I showed this to Rabbi Schoenfeld. He said you can't go to your daughter and be yotzei with her and light candles there. She said,
but she's in another city.
Why? The Mishnah Berurah says, it's only if it's Yeshua Shalom Bayis, but also here. But if it's a different year, then it's not a problem.
But that's only because it wouldn't be practical if you're a different year.
Wow, genius. That's what I said. That the reason why Mishnah Berurah says Ba'osir is because if it wouldn't be Ba'osir, there's no way to travel there in those days. How are you going to get there? By with Kishuf? But nowadays, who said there's a difference whether there's a Ba'osir or not Ba'osir? Right. So I'll show you. I won't go exactly. Let's look at page 3. Me Sheniz Dame. This is Rabbi Kleinman, who wrote a set of svarim based on conversations he had with Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky. So the main psakim are Shmuel Kamenetsky's psakim. So he says Misha Huzma. It's an amazing set of svarim. He's very thorough. He says, somebody was invited to eat supper at his friend's house. So in Beis Chaver Be'ir, if he's in the same city, if he goes in the same city, he can't light candles by his friend. In Beis Chaver Chutz Le'ir, so he says beferish that if it's a different city, exactly what my friend Rabbi Joey Schoenfeld said, that if it's a different city, the Medai from the Mishnah Berurah, that if it's a different city, you could go. So let's say he lives in Baltimore now. He just retired. He moved to Baltimore. So if he goes to his daughter in Lakewood or his son or wherever they live, so then according to Shmuel Kamenetsky, he would be able to light candles at their house. So on the bottom of the page are the footnotes. V'amar Mori Rabbi Shlita. The nira dataz Mishnah Berurah diktakol b'lushanam v'skiru mishi yeshel dira be'ir. The Mishnah Berurah was medayik when he said mishi if he has a house in the city. V'kavanosu b'zel haras the dafkim dirasahu be'ir. Ein makam achilasa neshel k'viyas chal. Aval makam achilasa chutz le'ir. If he has a house in a different city, but if he's in one place now, that's called a kviyas. So he said that Rav Shmuel said exactly like my friend Rabbi Yoel. And so Rabbi Kleinman says, I suggested to Rav Shmuel, the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Taz. If somebody has a house in the city, or the Milson Nakat, Mel Baron holds his pshat. They didn't have a way to travel. They didn't travel like we do. You come home at 4 a.m. They would wherever they were, they would stay. So he's saying that maybe there's no dig from the Mishnah Berurah. There's no difference between it's in the city or out of the city, your house. Umari Rabbi Shlita Amar the Lonir Lamaken. Shmuel said he doesn't hold that. Do you think that the Taz just for no reason mentioned in the city? The Kitzer is master the same way. Shizel Shano, Umishu Be'ir, Elishu Be'bayis, Umishu Be'iro, Elishu Be'bayis Acher, Kishigi is man hadloka, Tzarach Loshu Be'beis Uladi. Ubevadai HaKitzer Nokad Hachi Bediktuk, she said, Dafkim Hu Be'ir, the Azavi Beis Achrai, Kakrai, Bamba, Gabe Beisam. So that's what Rabbi Kleinman argued, what Ari argued, and what Mel argued. And Rav Shmuel dismissed it. Now I asked this question to Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky, to Rav Shmuel first, who was one of the main people I talk to if I have a shayla on halacha in Chicago, and he said, no, it doesn't matter that you went away to a different city, you still can't light there if you're going to be returning home at night. I said, but the Mishnah Berurah says, Ero. He says the Mishnah Berurah is not a rishon. You can't be medayik from a word like that in the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is quoting the Taz, but either way, he said that he didn't think that it made any significant difference.
What about the fact, like he says here, you should go, you got to go like for instance, when let's say you're gonna get home, he said 4 a.m. So 4 a.m.
He doesn't say anything about 4 a.m. He says,
but does it factor in the fact that if you light where you're eating, you can light on Bisman, when you're supposed to light, and then if you're going to wait till you get home, you're going to light it, I don't know, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, whatever it is you're going to get home.
No, if it's in the same year, it doesn't factor in. Because when it's the same city, when it's a different year, Shmuel says that you could light by your guest. If your house is in a different city, but if your house,
you're not even supposed to eat. If it's this man and you went to have supper by your daughter, I don't know, and then it's safe.
So there's eights where how you could eat. First of all, you could make a point to show merit to remind you.
Okay.
Or I tell people you can put a sign on your refrigerator door, or you can put it on the outside door. It would even be better. Don't forget to light the menorah, or you can even set the alarm on your cell phone, which everybody has.
You could eat, and then you could go home, and then
you
get home. Okay.
All right. The only thing is, if you're the only one that'll be home, then it becomes a big shaila. If it's late at night and there's no more people in the street, so that's a machlokas. The Mishnah Berurah and Rav Moshe. Mishnah Berurah says you can't light if there's nobody else to light for, because there's no presuming nisa. Rav Moshe says you could, but otherwise you could light when you get home.
Okay.
So this is so let's see the. So I'm going to show you more. You know what? I'll show you. It's very interesting on page 5. This is what Joey told me that he heard from Rabbi Luban. There's a sefer called My Chanukah. Well, I'll show you on page 4. My Chanukah. It's from Rabbi Yecheskel Roth. Rabbi Yecheskel Roth was the Sat Medayin in Lakewood, even though it says here that he's Ab Bezdin Kars Hausberg. That must have been in Europe. But he's and he wrote a number of svarim that were very popular. Cheskes Tyra used to use it all the time. So he says, look on page 4. He says, first page 4. So he says, "V'hine mashe dehitzrich hataz leilach beisel had b'makom she'ochel near the hainu imu bos ir dafke." He says the same thing like Rosh Shmuel. It's only if you're in the same city. Al meir leir ein tzarach lelachas lebeso. But you don't have to go to a different city. Even if you're planning to return later in the night. So what's called the same city? What? So he says a stunning thing. Amnam. What is that word? Williamsburg. Base Bay, Borough Park. If you're going from Williamsburg to Borough Park, Efsher Kemi Shem Tacha Shem Echad Shekar Brooklyn, the Chain Coast and Begitin Tzarach Lachzer Levei So the Mikri Ir Achas Mamish. So but if you go, let's say, to Manhattan, you see that he holds that if you go from Williamsburg, you go over the bridge into Manhattan, even though it's 5 minutes drive, but he holds that that's already called that you're in a different city, and you don't have to go to where you live. You can lie to where you're eating. And in the footnote, he says, the b'chol hadvarim shematzino shenoisen la l'dim shel mekom sheyatz misham kol mikra megillah shel ben bruz v'nimsa mukab yadal. He says in places where there's a difference between where you're coming from and where you are. He says lo matzino sheyachayvu also lachzor l'komo. You don't have to go back to where you came from. El shekar b'mkomo shenimsa sham kedin ben prach v'chein b'chol hadvarim shenoisen la chumash sheyatz misham pruz. So okay, he says that he has a whole bunch of places where he says you're not mechuyev to travel to and even if you could go with a horse, you don't have to take a horse, and if it's derech rechoka. So he holds, even, I don't know what Rosh Shmuel would say with it, but this is like the extreme. He says even if you're mamish a few miles away, but if the city is called a different name, then it's
so according to him, Edison to Island Park, 3 blocks would also be
3 blocks could be across the
well,
street.
they're both. I don't know. That's a good question. They're both in maybe he holds the Raritan Valley is enough to Middlesex County.
Island Park, not so hard for you to go home.
Howell to Lakewood, a different county. 2 blocks. How long?
I don't know.
I'm just saying. How do you?
We don't know. What?
So it's not. It's like the shame is the issue, not the distance.
He said that the Chazal weren't mechayiv to go to a different city. Okay, so the source of the whole thing is the Taz in on page 2. So let's see the Taz. First, the Shach says on the page 2. He says in Sifkot and Zion. I'm in the Magen Avram. He says Makom she'ochel hayne b'kviyas al v'misha ochel b'veis chaver b'akroi. But if you're only eating temporarily by somebody, tzarach lahadlik b'beiso, and he quotes that from the Shevis Yosef. Oh, ish l'madlakaso. The Shevis Yosef was a chaver of the Ramah, and that's the first source where they talk about this issue, where you're eating in one place and you have a house in another place. Everybody quotes the Shevis Yosef. It took me a while to find it. I had it, but I didn't add anything, so I didn't put it in the booklet. But the Taz explains this in much greater depth. He says, "V'yesh omrim" in the bottom of the page. V'yesh omrim the bizman hazek madlik makan shalocha. The Chuvas Rashi Simin Taf Kuf Memav Kosav Misha Ochal Al Shulchan Baal Habayis Afil Shulchan B'Bayis Sheni B'Fnei Atzma Ein Tzarach Hadlik. If you're eating by one place, and even if you're sleeping in another place, you don't have to be madlik. Aval Tzarach Ishtativ Im Baal Habayis Kedach Senoi Sheni B'Makam Acher Adkan. Mizeh Yal from Mad Allah Azin Basa Makam Shina the Im Ken Havilei Lozeh Chiyav Hadlik Makam Sheshochev. The Rashi says that you should like where you're eating. So he says you see that the main thing is where you're eating. The nearer the Gamra Mal Amari El B'Mishi Yeshul Tamid Cheder Miyuchad L'Achila V'Cheder Acher L'Shchiva Acher Iker Hu Cheder Achila Ukenidan Harash. But the Ramah says that V'Yeshomim Dizman Azesh Madikim Yad V'Makom Shiyachol. The Ramah is talking about where you have two locations, one place where you eat and one where you sleep. If somebody had, and this is the phrase that everybody's being medayik from, somebody has a house in the city, it's obvious that you can't light in the house where you ate. The also bias who saw it sham ain dino Ella kachsenoi shemadlikin olav bebayis. Who ain't? Oh, I skipped a line.
Yeah.
Oh, Ella tzarach leilech l'chavero hadlik sham. Lebesa, you have to go home and light. Vim achsul taivas achila ve'ein arotz l'lazos misham achshav. If you had a big taiva, the Mishnah Berurah says if he doesn't want to go home, but he didn't quote this part about it. Im achsul taivas achila. I guess he thought it was disparaging. But if you're too lazy to go home, and because you want to eat more, they should light for him in the house. The also buy shu soid sham ein dino ella kachsenoi v'shemadlik olav b'bayis v'hu eino madlik b'makam shehu. Afil fi masha kasafti b'samach nachsenoi r'shoy lahadlik gam b'makam shusham. Even though an achsenoi could light where he is, hainu she'achshav she'item sham shchivas sham. That's only if he's a guest and he sleeps there. He's going to eat in an hour or two. And here's the part that I should have underlined. There's no logic that he should light where he ate. It's like you're standing in the middle of the street. The halach is right. The halach is you have to light in the house, and if you went to eat for an hour or two, and you're not even sleeping there, that's not called your house. Hagam isik sasmei adam b'shosh ochim b'sudei tzol adam acher sholchim acher, and they were saying medolkim sham. When they eat by somebody, they send along candles. The somchin al and the samach on the Ramah that says you light where you're eating. Tos be adam. It's a big tos. Now to put this into a little more context, there's a big discussion among the Achronim about the din of Neri Shuveso. the Neri Shavesum doesn't mean the house; it means it's the family. But does a person have to have a house in order to light Hanukkah candles? Could you, if you're out in the field, could you light Hanukkah candles? If you're taking a hike and you're in the middle of no place, could you light Hanukkah candles? Or if you're driving someplace and you're on the Route 89 or wherever, and you're in your car and you're driving, do you need to have a bias or you don't have to have a bias? So most of the Acharonim say that the mitzvah of Hadlakas Neiros is only in a bias. It's only in a house. There's no mitzvah to light in a field.
So in halacha, if somebody doesn't have a house, he sees Neiros Hanukkah, you make a bracha shalos nisim on the ones that he sees.
Right, he's a raya. So if you look on page 1, that's exactly correct. The Gemara says this is the raya that everybody brings. And near the end of the Gemara, I read the top part, but here the underline near the end. Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi Amar Rav Hamadlik ner shel Chanukah tzarich levarech. When you light the candles, you have to make a bracha. Rav Yirmiyah Amar Roy ner shel Chanukah tzarich levarech. Rav Yirmiyah says if you see the ner Chanukah, you also have to make a bracha of she'asa nisim. So the question is, why are you making? What do you mean you're seeing a ner Chanukah? Didn't you make a bracha when you lit it? So Rashi on the right side of the page, where I have it underlined, says, Umatsasi Rashi says, he was walking in the market and he sees the menorah. Umatsasi b'shem Rabbeinu Yitzchak ben Yehuda, she'amar mishem Rav Yaakov, the lo huskaka bracha zu el mish lo hedlik bebeso adayin. This bracha of that a raya makes a bracha Shas Nisim, that's only for somebody who didn't light yet. Because if he already lit, he already said Shas Nisim. Oh, Yoshe B'Svina. Or if he's on a boat. So everybody asks, so what if he's on a boat? What kind of example is that? If you're on a boat and it's Hanukkah, so you should light a menorah on the boat. Why does Rashi say that if you're on a boat? So from here, the many, Rav Moshe and Rav Yashav and Rav Shlomo Zalman and many others say that you see from Rashi that you can't light on a boat. A boat is not a bias, and therefore you can't be yotzei the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah if it's not a bias. And if you're out in the field, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. So Rav Waldenberg, who's the author of the Tzitz Eliezer, he disagrees. He says you could light on a boat. He says, what does Rashi mean that if you're on the boat you didn't light? He says Rashi means because usually when you're on a boat you don't have candles. Who takes long candles on a boat? So Rav Moshe what?
1,000 years ago.
Yeah, 1,000 years ago. But the thing is, if you know that it's Hanukkah, so you should have taken a long candle. I mean, what? Why is that an example that Rashi? Rashi doesn't like that explanation. Rashi quotes that explanation. I mean, he doesn't quote it from Rav Waldenberg. Where Rashi is doche. He said if Rashi went out of his way to talk about a boat, and if Rashi meant to say if somebody's on a boat without candles, he should have said so. Because you can't assume just because he's on a boat that he didn't take long candles for.
How would anybody see at night if they didn't have candles on a boat?
The moon.
That was it.
Yeah, or flashlights.
It is hard to believe that somebody went on a boat 1,000 years ago without.
Well, some kind of illumination.
Okay.
Mainly for cooking.
All right. But this is the raya that most of the contemporary poskim bring a raya from this Rashi. There's other rayas as well. Tosas in Rosh Hashanah, I think, or Sukkah says something similar. That the mitzvah is only on a person that has a bias. If you don't have a bias, you can't light Ner Chanukah. What do you do if you're on an airplane during Hanukkah, or if you're in a train on Hanukkah? What should you do then? So, if you look on page, it's the Marsham. Where did I put it? I can put it here. Oh, here on page 8. The Marsham is the grandfather of Rav Shalom Shvadron. How do I know? Because Rav Shalom Shvadron was Mesader, the Ksavim of the Marsham, and on the title page he says that he's the grandson of the author. The Marsham was a Rav in a city called Brazin or someplace. And we have it here in the library. It's often quoted, the Marsham. We have around 10 volumes of his Shalos Teshuvos. So and this Teshuvah was written in Tafresh Samach Vav, which was about 118 years ago or something, 140.
2006.
2006. 1906.
1906.
So he says, he's writing to Rav Shimon Valtuk, who's the Rav in Leipzig. The Tshuvas Mechtava B'Yom, and everybody in the world quotes this Tshuva. The Tshuvas Mechtava B'Yom Beis Chanukah, and Mutar Hadik Ner Chanukah Al what is that word? Aban. That's a train. Lo Matzasi Harbim Bavur. Avo Halo Misha Shilaim Ba'ad Kol Halayla Havi Kesachalo Beis Dira Lecho Velishon Sham. If you paid for your ticket, so you rented that area. V'chayiv b'ner Chanukah. Umasha Rashi b'Yoshe b'Sfina. Yeshlomar Shahaya Sfinos Stumos below Psuchos, that it's open below Kiri, and didn't have a roof. Varuch Menashe V'Lavi Begeder Bayis Klal. And therefore it's not, you can't call it a house because it's open. After Ban Eino Omen Mokem Echad, and even though the train is moving and there's a principle of Mahalech Rochev Kimahalech, and if you're riding, it's if you're traveling and you don't have houses that you're traveling. Well, Nimsa B'Shul Makom Sheyatzar Bayis Kavua L'Mashim Mitzvasa B'Shvil Pesumi Nisa Klau. He says, even though it's not a stationary house, a train, but it doesn't say any place it has to be stationary house. The main thing is it has to be a bias. So as long as you're inside an enclosed booth, that's a bias. The boat, if it would be enclosed, it would be a bias. But now, so some say that according to the Marsham, you could do it on a plane. It's the same as a boat.
It's dangerous, and I was there 25 years ago when somebody started to do it. And the guy says, "I'm trying to explain to him why you shouldn't do it." He says, "There's no pursuing Niso Air France is flying by." I said, as I'm telling this guy, he said, the steward goes by, says, "Ma, Tamashuga," and claps it down. That was the end of it. Second night of Hanukkah.
Yeah, well, if you want to get, besides being Meshuggah, if you want to get arrested, it's a good thing to do.
Good way to do it.
It's a good way. You get arrested quickly, especially now.
After 9/11.
Nowadays, they'll put you.
What about on a cruise ship, which is a Sfina?
So the thing is like this: I don't think that an airplane is the same as a boat, because he's talking about if you rented a sleeping, what do they call it? It has a name.
Sleeper.
Sleeper. So it's you're sleeping there and you're eating there. So he says that you have it for one day, so it's yours. But a plane, you don't. It's not your place. You're one of 1,000 people on an airplane. So I don't think.
Unless you're in business class on one of these things.
Okay, in economy, if they give you a if you could close the door and I guess if you spend $15,000 you can get that. But otherwise, now there's an eighth on a plane. What you could do, and that is, you take along a flashlight. Yeah. So the many of the poskim say that you're not yotzei ner Chanukah with a flashlight because there's no combustion. It's not a candle. But Rosh Hashanah Zalman Auerbach seemed to be okay with it. But he said the problem with he said about electric menorah, you're not yotzei because the halach is you have to have the shear of the oil in the candle before you light, and electricity is constantly being produced by the generator wherever it's located. So you don't have the shear when you plug it in and you turn it on. It's not called that you have a shear because every second there's new electricity. But he says if you have a flashlight, so then you have the power source is right there. So then he held that that's comparable to. So that's what they say that you should, if you're going on a plane, you should take along a flashlight. important is to know that you're not supposed to move it because the Ner Chanukah, you're not supposed to change the place. You're supposed to leave it exactly where it is. So you have to put it on your lap someplace and leave it there for at least a half hour after Tzeis Kochavim. But that only helps if you say like Rav Oldenburg that you don't need a bias. But or if you think that the Marsham's heter would apply to a plane, but I don't think it does. So if you hold that you have to light in a bias, so you're not accomplishing anything by holding a flashlight in a plane.
What about if you're a sailor on a ship and you live on the ship? That's your
Usually a sailor has his own quarters on the ship. Then if he has his own quarters, then
you have your own quarters too.
yeah, echanami. So, but one thing you see from the Marsham is that the Marsham agrees that the other poskim that you have to have a bias, and if it's because that's what he's discussing here, that it's made, and he says that that's why it's different than a boat, because a boat is not a bias because it's open, but according to the Marsham, you can light Ner Chanukah in a car, because the car is your private quarters, and you own it or you rented it, and it has a roof. And the fact it's not stationary, he says it doesn't matter.
That would only be if you're spending all night in the car.
Going somewhere you're not eating.
Bob
there.
Lancey's
Bob Lancey's he's a madrega b'fnei atzil, right? But if you're not sleeping in the car, if you just rented it for a few hours, so then it would be the same as going to somebody's house and eating. So now, if you go back to the Taz, so the Taz says that if you go to eat by somebody, you don't have the halacha of achsanoi that you should be able to light candles there, because it's like because it's not called just because you ate there. This is like you're standing in the middle of the street. So what you see from the Taz is that the Taz holds that clearly the Taz holds that you're not yotzei if you're standing in the middle of the street, because that's what he's saying. It's like you were standing in the street, and the Taz holds that an achsanoi, in order to be able to have the halacha of achsanoi, that an achsanoi can be mishtatei bepruta with the Baal Bayis, is only if you're part of the household. You have to have some shaykhis to the house. But if you're there for an hour or two here and then you leave, so then you can't be considered an achsanoi. An achsanoi has to be somebody that's sleeping there. Then you're if you sleep overnight, then all the poskim agree that you could light where you're sleeping. But if you're there for a few hours to eat dinner and then you leave, so you can't be considered to be an achsanoi. So it would seem to me, I can't argue with my Rabbi. Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky Shlita was my Mori Rabbi, is my Rabbi, Yeshiva Philadelphia. So I'm not arguing with him, but I'm just pointing out that if the svara is that you can't become part of a household by being there for an hour or two, so it shouldn't make any difference whether you're in the same city or a different. Let's say you lived in Baltimore and it's going to take you 4 hours to get home.
My son last night.
Your son last night.
My son.
Oh, your son. Okay.
And when he got home.
Okay, there you are. He agreed with me. Mm-hmm. But if the svara is that if you're there for just an hour or two, it's like lighting in the street. So then, what difference does it make where your house is? Even if you had no house, it would seem from the Taz that that's nothing. To have a meal by somebody doesn't give you any kviyas in the house. You have to have a shaykhus to the house, and that shaykhus is by if you sleep in the house. Or if you sleep in the area, so then you have one kviyas is where you sleep and one kviyas is where you eat. So then we say that the kviyas where you eat is a bigger kviyas. But if you have a house that you could go to, if you just ate in the house, L'chara, it shouldn't make any difference where the house is. It's still not a kvias. So that point of view is, you'll find expressed on page 7. Rav Shmuel Felder, who is a posek in Lakewood. He was in Lakewood when I was in Lakewood, and even then he was a very big Talmud Chacham. And he's written on Yom Tovim. He has started out small pamphlets and then bigger pamphlets. So he says, "Im hoyse shas etchak v'yotze mi beisol kodem zman hadlaka v'dait alachser b'os halayla," on the top of the page. Yadlik bebeisol kishiaser. He has to light in his house. V'lo yadlik bebayis shahol sham lechol sudas aroi kevish deyesh sad gadol deini yotze l'go mikri beisol. So he says, because it's not called your house. So he says in the footnote, "Hine lashon ataz the mishi yeshul dira be'ir b'holach pamachas chutz lebeso v'sovet etzel chavero." He left the house and he went to eat by somebody. Pshita shelo yanich beso v'yadlik b'vayis shu ochel sham. You can't light where you're eating. Pamachas etzel chavero eltzor leila beso hadlik sham. U'v'sefer my Chanukah kasav. That's what I just showed you from the Sat Medayin. The nearer the Haina Dafka Mieshel Bayis Boseir. That's only if your house is in the same city. Ava Meir Leir, even from Williamsburg to Borough Park, he's Mesopik. Ain't Tzarlachsa Basic Day, Shilahadik Ner Chanukah. The Afsha Daita Lachsa Sham Bosa Laila. El Yadlik Mibakam Shusham. Even if you're planning to go home later, but you should light where you are, Bisman Trivad Lacha. The Aim Mechayvin Oso Lachsa Miyad Lebesel. The Taimo and the Samadayin's svar is the Afim Makomo Shenasnal Din Makom Shiatsim Misham. In areas in halacha where there's a difference between where you came from and where you are, they're not required to go back. If you're coming from an open city to a closed city, you don't have to go back. If you're in one city, if you're in a close city, then Purim is a day later. If it's an open city, it's on your Dalet. So you're not mechuyev to, if you have a house in the area that's open, you're not mechuyev, and you're in the close city, you could hear Megillah in the Mukafis Choma city. Or the other way around, or if you're in the Makkah, you can hear Megillah on your Dalet, you're not mechuyev to go back to the other place. So Rabbi Felder says, "Ach ein nirikein el shataz diber behovet." The Taz, he's agreeing with Rabbi Kleinman's dichui of the Raya, and he's agreeing with Mel Barinholtz and with me. The Bismano lo hayashchiach klal sheyelch ir acheres lachol suda bodedes v'yachse bosi yom v'eso. It wasn't common that you should eat one meal and then you're going to go home. V'im hayasfir le lechadesh u'lechalek bein oso ir acheres hayalo lefaresh hadin l'hasbiro v'lo listam. You should have written that beferish. V'al kein akorchach hadin kein gam min hoch ir acheres. So he says he assumes that it's the same din. V'od the zeal bus timer. You should follow the reasoning. The timer that tazu the besuda achas ein nachshavas beso. V'havi kamadlik beruchov shalir. It's like you're out in the street. V'imkein ein nafkiminim yeshlo ba'is birazos o biracheres. So what difference does it make where your household is? If your house is in the same city or a different city. The point is that eating at somebody's house for an hour doesn't give you a kvias in that house. If you'll say that he's not mechuyev to go home, so then good, so don't go home, but he can't light, because he doesn't have a house nearby, and he can't light where he is. He doesn't have a place to sleep, and he has a place to eat. So there you have the contemporary machlokas And there's other Svarim, other contemporary Svarim that have the same discussion about whether do you say that if it's a different city, the diak from the Mishnah and the Mishnah is quoting the Taz. If it's a different city, you could be an Achsanai, and or do you say that it doesn't make a difference? Now the truth is that this
does anybody like Jack? I mean, my son was by us for Shabbos, and I said, "Wait till you go home to light," without asking him.
So Motzei Shabbos.
But is it different?
Motzei Shabbos. Many of the posting say that's a big discussion. Posting. What's better? Friday night for sure. They light where they're staying.
Right, yeah.
But Motzei Shabbos, do we say that since till now they were in the house, so they already have a kviyas there? Or do we say since they're planning to leave, so they lose their kviyas? So, Yesh Amrim one way, and Yesh Amrim the other way.
A separate argument?
The shayla is whether you're still an Achsanai. You're on the way out. Right. So Rosh Shlomo Zalman says that you should, that if you're there already for Shabbos, you should light. You could light where
could or should.
You should light where you are, but Motzei Shabbos. But he makes a condition. He says that you have to light. You have to stay in the house for a half hour after you light, because otherwise, as soon as you leave, it's no longer your house. And since Rosh Shlomo Zalman is of the school of thought that you can't light in the field or in the street, like the Taz says, so therefore he's saying that if you once you leave, you're no longer part of the bias.
So that basically he says the others that say you should wait till you go home, or
there are others that say you should wait till you go home. And then I think the Rosh Shlomo Zalman says that especially if you eat something, then it's even better. If you wait a half hour and you eat something, then
so it's not a Shabbos thing, right? If you're there on a Monday and you stay, whatever, just once you were somewhere.
Yeah, once you slept overnight. You slept overnight. I mean, I tell people they could light it. I mean, this way they're lighting more of the Zman. But okay, but it's whichever way you go, it's Yesh Amal L'Smoch.
Is there any difference in that Friday night?
There's no difference between Friday night and during the week. So, B'Tzalel showed me a tshuva on the last page from Rabbi Horowitz. It's a called Kinyan Bahalacha, which he said that I introduced it to him a few years ago. Now, he has a tshuva about the same thing. So I'm running late, so I'm just going to tell you that.
Who is this? I'm sorry.
His name is Rabbi Horowitz.
Okay.
He's in Strasbourg.
Contemporaries.
Well, this tshuva was written Tafshim Mem Hey, so so it's not too long ago.
Right.
I don't know. I'm not sure if he's still alive, but he talks about the same issue where a family left their house and they came to the parents, and for a meal, are they allowed to light there? So he says that the main argument that he makes is that okay, I should have underlined where it is, but he makes an argument that there's a difference between if your wife is still home. Oh, let's read the second paragraph because he talks about it. Hashevis Yosef. The Misha Ochel bebeis chaver bakroit so hardly bebeis. If you eat in one meal, you're not sleeping there. You have to eat. You have to light where you at your home. Achsham Mayri sheishto bebeiso. That's talking about where you left your wife at home. Kamosha Siyam Sham O Ishto Mad Lekaso. Because it's Shmuel Ram and the Taz say if you're too lazy to go home, then you should tell your wife to light for you. The Chain him to be a Taz. B'shem Rashi, Mishay Shodir Bir B'Hol Pamas L'Tz Beisel L'Tz Chaver Tzarech Leil Beisel Hadlik Sham Nami Mari Ishto B'Beisel K'Moshe Kosav Achazeh V'im okay Avol Misha Holach Im Kol B'nei Beisel Eitzel Harem Ein Lanu Raya Misham. So he wants to make a chiluk between whether you're going with your family or you went alone. Because if you went alone, so then the fact that you ate a meal is not enough to be oiker yourself from your dira, because your family's still there. But if your whole family left, then it's no longer their makom dira for right now. So therefore, he holds that that you could light, if you go with your family, you could light. You go to a Hanukkah party with your kids and your wife, then you could light where it's located. So in Svara, what would you say? Would you agree to that? Or would you disagree?
I mean, the Taz doesn't say anything. The Taz mentions in passing that you could have your wife light, but it doesn't.
Yeah, he doesn't say that there's a difference, but Rabbi Horowitz is saying that you have no right. You can't bring me a ride from the Taz if he's talking.
But then the Taz would have to say, assuming the guy is married.
Okay, that's a yes, that's a good point. But I would say like this. I would say that again, go after the svara. The Taz's svara is that it's not called your bias if you're just eating a meal there. Mm-hmm. So it's like you're eating in the street. So he's saying the Wendell I say it's not your bias. That's if you have a wife in another house. But if your wife is not in that house, then it's not like you're eating in the street. I don't hear it so good, and especially since what does it make where your wife is? It's your house. Your house is your house. It's only your house if your wife is there. It's not. It has to do with the family. It's a family affair. If you have a house, so that's called you have a kvias in the house. Now, what do you want to say, B'tzal?
The next paragraph he quotes the B'chodesh.
Right.
The B'chodesh seems to say, and the Mishabur, the Be'er Halacha, emphasizes this point. The B'chodesh seems to say that the only time where you don't have to go home, if you can, is if you're gone with your whole family for all 8 days of the month.
I know. So the B'chodesh says 8 days, but the poskim say it's lav dafka. You're right. He says it doesn't with mechitesi. So he says that the B'chodesh is lav dafka. Then that's how the contemporary poskim assume that it doesn't matter whether it's 1 day or 5 days. Right. It doesn't make a difference.
That's the Shiloh with somebody involving 8 days.
Yeah.
But he later goes on to argue within Persimanisa different from the Taz. He argues on the Taz, and he says that within Persimanisa that you have to have some sort of shaykhus and there has to be some sort of Persimanisa going on in your house. So if there's nobody in your house, that's why you don't have to do Persimanisa there. So he says in the net.
Where does he say that?
It quotes the Chayagam, and then it's in the middle of the last paragraph.
Which column?
All right.
Second column.
Okay, I'll have to read it later. I didn't see it. I looked through it before. I know you told me that he says that, but I didn't see it.
The Taz mentioned the Ishto, so he could light Bisman and eat now and then still be lighting Bisman. That's the only.
Taz mentions that it's right. Again, it's the practical. Because he's saying that you can be Yotze.
The issue seems to be that he says that if you have a bias, you should go back. What if you're hungry? That's what he says.
Right, he explicitly said. And if your Ishto is there, so you can be Yotze, you can eat and you can have it Bisman.
So it's really begins. But he says that if you're. That's basically wherever you are.
Right. Okay, now I want to discuss one more thing before we leave this topic, and this din of Achsanai is very perplexing. What is this halacha that the Achsanai has to mishtatif bepruta? If the halacha of Achsanai, you see from the Taz that Achsanai is considered to be part of the bias. That's the whole reason why he's in Achsanai. That's what the Taz says, that if he doesn't sleep there, then he's not. Then it's as if he's lighting a candle in the street because it's not his house. What makes it his house is the fact that he's sleeping there. So then, why is there a halacha that an achsanai, if he wants to light at that house, the Gemara says that Rav Zera said, "Now that I'm married, I can be out to my wife's halacha. But before I got married and I was single, I couldn't be out to my wife, so I had to be mishtatif b'pruta." And it brings that in the Shulchan Aruch that Achsanai has to be Mishtat Pruta. Why does an Achsanai have to be Mishtat Pruta? What does that accomplish? Giving a Pruta.
Children don't have to be Mishtat Pruta. So what is it?
Yeah. Why? Yeah. So there's two drachim about why you have to Mishtat Pruta. One drach is that there are Rishonim that seem to say that you have to own the oil. You have to own the oil. That's what on page 8. The Ran says the Ran's talking about this in Pesachim. Sometimes you say al and sometimes you say le, and one of the column is that you say if it's efshel asos ayidei shaliach, you say al. So the Ran asked me, Ika made the b'hai klala the hadlaka on the left side near the top. Okay. The hadlok is nechanuk shefshel asos ayidei shliach v'fil hachim yivach hadlik. Why do you make? Why don't you say al hadlokas neris? He says v'ikol maybe the kevin amrinim beperek b'madlikim the tarach shtatufi bepriti kevin sheni yotze el b'shal atzmo arei ein mitzvah zu yichol is kaim ayidei acher. It's not called efshel asos ayidei shliach. Okay, so this is just parenthetical, but he says that you see from the sugya that you have to mistar pepruta that you have to own the oil, and it appears from the Ran.
Their Shabbos.
He's on their Hanukkah. He's quoting he's quoting the Gemara we just saw in Bameh Madlikim Daf Chav Gimel.
Oh, okay.
He's on their Hanukkah. So it would seem that he holds that the reason why you have to mishtativ is because otherwise, because you always have to mishtativ. You can't light. So if you bring along your own oil, you don't have to be mishtativ. But if you want to be yotzei with the Baal Bus, you have to be mishtativ. So all the Acharonim go to town. How much are you being mishtativ? The Mishnah Berurah says you don't have to mishtativ. It's befruited. So but you don't have a shear to oil. So what does it do good to be mishtativ? Mishnah Berurah says you should add a little bit more oil. What is a little bit more? And the guy already had enough oil to burn the whole zman. Now you add a little more, so that oil is superfluous. And then there's a halacha that you're not kind of metaltalin with kesef. That midiraisa you are, but midirabana you're not. So even though you paid for it, so you don't own it. So there's a whole arichas in the Acharonim. They struggle to understand what it, and nobody ever said this. This is a new halacha that you have to own the oil. What about by sukkahs? We go crazy to make sure that everybody's kind of the lulav. I can't keep track always. I give it to my daughter. I said then you mark it back to me because you need lachem. So, but I never heard anybody. I'm not marking the oil to my kids Chanukah. So the other derech is Rosh Zalman. Rosh Zalman says that the reason why you have to be mishtativ bepruti is, if you look on page 7 at the bottom, he says, he's talking about being mishtativ with achsenoi. He says, gam there, in the, I didn't underline it, but in Yud Beis, right underneath the main line there, he says, he says, gam there, the Indian hishtatis ain't a b'taras bailas al shemen. It's not so you should own the oil. What's the difference if you own it? The atub esrogud, the bailechem. You want to be mekayim pesuma nisa. So what? There's a Chazal made a halacha in pesuma nisa that if it's not yours, there's no pesuma nisa. Why?
You give somebody $1, that makes you more
because you're kids? No, because since you're being mishtatif in the hadlakas neiros, so you have a connection to the bias. He's being madlik neiros for the bias, and you're being mishtatif, so you're connected to the.
By giving him 25 cents or $1, how are you being mishtatif?
It's not. You're asking as like a halacha question. If it was with Hilchos Kinyanim, it's the concept that Chazal wanted you to have a shaychus to the bias. So the way you have a shaychus is that you're a partner in the oil. That
having a meal. You're having a meal with them.
So you see that sleeping there and having a meal is not enough for you to be part of the bias. You have to do. Chazal said that in addition to eating there and sleeping there, you have to be mishtatif bepruta in order to be considered part of the bias.
But you're not really. What we're saying, on the one hand, you're saying you're not really getting any of the oil. You're really not being mishtatif, and you're not contributing really anything to the oil.
It's a token. It's a token action,
it's a symbolic act.
But it shows, because since Ner Chanukah requires a bias, and you can't light in the street. So you have to be connected to the bias. So this, it's not your house. You just be passing by. So now you're more part of the house.
You 80 latkes. That's more of a connection than the.
I guess he didn't think of that you could eat 80 latkes. But that's what Shlomo Zalman says, and Rav Asher Weiss says the same exact thing. He said it has a nice long tshuva that by being mishtatif bepruta, so that makes you part of the bias. So that makes the argument that if you're sleeping, if you just eat a short meal and then you disappear, it makes the argument a little bit stronger that even if your bias is in a different city, but you have to be the whole idea of achsanoi is that you're part of the bias. I mean, you saw that in the Taz anyway. The Taz says you have to be part of the bias. The strange thing is that if you look on page 5, in what the Satmar Dayan, who said that if you're going from Williamsburg to Borough Park, it's called it's Chutz Le'ir. He says at the bottom of the page, near B'mishi Yotzei Aydei Hashutvis Priti Midim Nachsanoi, somebody who's Yotzei B'Hadlaka with this din that you give him prutos, and Tzarech Dafka Hishtatev B'Achsanoi Shenim Sisham. You don't have to give it to the person where you're staying. Al Yachol Hishtatev Gam B'Bayis Acher She'en Dor Sham Kla. You can go to anybody and give him pruta. And he says why? The Hayel Ha'ad Achsanoi Ein Eleh Achiv Bayis El Choves Aguf Ba'alma. This din of Achsanoi is not because there's two dinim. The Rav talks about the same thing also. There's two dinim. There's a din of Choves Haguf and a din of Choves Habayis. So if you're an Achsanoi, you're not Mekayim Choves Habayis. The only thing you can Mekayim is Choves Haguf. So you Mekayim Choves Haguf by being Mishtatif for Pruta. So he says that you could be Mishtatif Pruta of anybody. If you came within Choves Haguf, Asinalah, ain't nafkamina, Be'ezamakum, Mumadlik. What difference to make where it is?
Where did this Choves Haguf come from all of a sudden?
Because that's the way he understood this idea of Achsanoi. He's dealing with the same problem. Why does the Achsanoi have to be Mishtatif for Pruta? What does it accomplish? So he's saying that what it accomplishes is that that in order to have in other words, the Rish Shlomo Zalman is saying that you have to, that the shutfis makes you part of the bias. He obviously didn't thought that that's a strange thing to say, but he's saying that it makes you part of the hadlaka. In other words, it is strange because why should giving somebody money for their oil make you part of their house? Right. So you have to say that it's because since Hanukkah is connected to the house, it's integrated into the house, so therefore when you are mishtativ, so it makes you part of, you're part of the family.
Why not do a belt and suspenders?
Who said it's for the oil?
What?
Who said you're giving the money for the oil? Or are you giving money to stay in the house?
No, that's what everybody says. It's mishtativ pruti in the oil. That's what Mishnah Berurah says.
Why not do both?
I think the Shulchan Aruch says, what?
Why not do both? Why not give the money, and that way be Yosef with the bias in case, and then when you get home, light again.
Well, the question is, first of all, you want to light Bisman, and the shah will be if you can make a bracha.
Saying. You're lighting with Bisman when your father's house, because he's lighting.
So once you lit Bisman, then there's no mitzvah to light again. It's nothing. It's just
the mitzvah is it's in your own house.
There's no mitzvah to light if you're yaitz already. Once you yaitz, well, we discussed it a few years ago. Is there an Inyan to light longer? But if longer is one thing, but because at least it's part of the original adlaka. But you can't make up your own Pesuma Nisa. Anyway, I have a tremendous kasha on Rosh Shlomo Zalman, and I mean I think it's tremendous. If the purpose of being mishtatif b'pruta is that it makes you part of the bias, so you see that they because otherwise you can't light there because just because you're an achsanoi and you slept there doesn't connect you to the house enough that you could lie and halakas neres requires a bias, so then. What the halacha is, Mishnah Berurah says that if you feel like it, you can light on your own. You don't have to be mishtatif b'pruta. You could, if you look on page 8, the Mishnah Berurah says, and this is what most people do. Most people, when they're achsanai, they're not mishtatif b'pruta. They take along their own menorah. Mm-hmm. My kids were with us for Shabbos. They all brought their own menorahs. Right. The Mishnah Berurah says, "Mikom," on the bottom of page 8. If he has his own candle, it's better for him to light himself. So what does it help for him to light if the purpose of giving the money is to make it your bias, and you can't light when you don't have a bias. So what does it help to give money? What does it help to light? How can you light yourself without being mishtatif b'ruta? You're not part of the bias. But the fact that you're lighting doesn't make you part of the bias. It's only if you're mishtatif in the Baal bias hadlaka, you're part of the bias. But just if maybe holds that your lighting makes you part of the bias. I don't know.
Your children bring their own menorah. They're staying overnight.
What's the problem? He's lighting his own menorah.
I know, but he's not being mishtatif b'pruta when he lights his own menorah.
He's staying overnight.
Yeah, let's say he's staying overnight.
So this is
But
his
it,
house.
but you see that without being mishtatev pruta, he's not yotz with the Baal Bayis' lighting.
Right.
Because even though he's there, and he's part of the house, but it's not enough. Chazal said, according to Shlomo Zalman, Chazal said you have to do something more to become part of the house. You have to make some kind of kinyan in the oil. So if that's the case, so then how could you light yourself without being mishtatev?
Maybe he doesn't agree that you can with the Mishnah. Maybe he said.
The Mishnah Berurah quotes it from the Rabbi and the Derech Chaim and the Sivas. You can't.
The difference of someone being motzi you versus you doing the for yourself.
Yeah.
If it has to do, yeah, there could be, but if it has to do with they have to light in a bias. The Taz says that if you're not a nachsanoi, it's like if you just eat, you're like eating in the field. So that's according to Shlomo Zalman. It's what the giving the money is making it that it's your house. You're not lighting in the field. So if you didn't give money, so even though you're lighting yourself, but it's like lighting in the field. If you don't have that kesher to the bias. And then I had what?
But he's not one of the Mehabayis such that the Balabayis' light.
Oh, I'm late.
Will be poker him.
They wanted that. I just want to tell you one more problem I have, and that is that why is there no din mahadrin by Achsenoi? Well, how come the Gemara says that Rav Sheshes was yotzei by Mishtate Perputa? Why didn't he light himself? It's a mahadrin to light yourself. Mahadrin, mina mahadrin. That's another big kasha on the
But you got to be part of the bias.